Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Greening Your Faith Building webinar. I am Reverend Michelle Singh. I'm an interfaith minister and the Executive Director of Faith and the Common Good. We appreciate you joining us this afternoon to learn from our building nerd, as he calls himself, Stephen Collette. He's the Building Audit Manager for Faith and the Common Good. Stephen created the Green Audit after seeing an opportunity to improve the connections between faith, buildings, and the existing passion of people to want to do the right thing within their faith community. The Green Audit has been delivered across Canada to rave reviews, and recently, Stephen has expanded the types of building audits available to faith communities. Stephen owns his own company, Your Healthy House, and I'm sure you see that sign right behind his head there, which carries out indoor environmental building inspections and consulting, as well as teaches across North America, and he also has his own podcast. Actually, Stephen, maybe you can put the link for your podcast in the chat so that everyone can capture that.
Thank you.
Stephen is a certified building biology environmental consultant, a leadership in energy and environmental design accredited professional, and a building science specialist. He lives in Lakefield, Ontario with his wife and daughters. Now, Stephen is going to present for a few minutes or so, and then we will open it up to questions either from the chat box, or I can unmute people as well if you wave your hand or use the option at the bottom. You can click on participants, find your name, and you will see an option that says more. When you click on more, it gives you an opportunity to raise your hand. And with that, I hand it over to Stephen.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I do appreciate it. I appreciate everyone really taking the time out of their lives to sit in on this talk. I do hope to make it worth your while. I know these are strange times. We're trying to figure out, whether our congregational spaces are open or not, what to do and how to treat them. It's a little chaotic. So thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. For those just joining in, at the bottom, there's a chat function. The chat box will pop up. If you're new to Zoom, you can type comments to everyone. You can share where you're from and what congregation you're with. So feel free to do that. And I'll be putting some links and whatnot in there. And if you have specific questions, you can also throw the questions in there as well as I'm talking. So first off, Faith in the Common Good, a brief introduction for those who may not know. We're a multi-faith national nonprofit, and we've been around for around 20 years. And we work with all denominations, all faiths, and stewardship and finding that common good for everybody is our goal. And stewardship has been one of the anchors, Greening Sacred Spaces. You may know us by. That was one of our main programs for many years. We're also do a variety of other things. I'm one slice of the pie. I am the Building Audit Manager. So we used to do years and years ago, when I first got involved, we had a chance, a grant program from Ontario Hydro to deliver 100 energy audits throughout Ontario to faith communities. And it was a great project. It was really interesting. And we partnered with a bunch of Green Community Canada organizations and delivered these. And because I was a building nerd, I followed around and went on a lot of them. And they were really valuable to the people who hang out in the furnace room after service. And they were really important to the people who do the bookkeeping. But what we found, and what really resonated with me, is there were people who had different passions, who were interested in the kitchen, interested in the gardens, interested in the choir, interested in, leadership, stewardship. And I realized we were missing the real strength within faith communities, which is the people, right? You are the strength, all of you taking your volunteer time to be here, all of you just interested in wanting to learn. And so I created the Green Audit with my colleague, David Patterson, with the idea of how can we engage each and every one within the congregation to want to do their part for sustainability, for stewardship, for creation care, for saving nickels and dimes that add up to dollars. And so that's how the Green Audit sort of came about, because people were having questions with just energy audits. And so, yeah, we've delivered a few hundred coast to coast. And every time I learn something, I love crawling around any kind of faith community building. So I'm a heritage professional specializing in faith community building. So yeah, as Michelle said, I'm a nerd. I'm a total building nerd. So we really want to think about how these buildings operate and how they perform so that we can save energy and reduce our carbon footprint. The more money we can save, the more money we have for mission work. And that's really critical. Not everyone cares about the environment. That's okay. It's just everybody's wired differently. But everybody's okay with saving bag loads of money. And if we can put that towards our mission work, that creates real opportunities. Okay. So we want to think about your operational costs. And this last time frame of super weirdness is actually really interesting and provides you a window to understand what it costs to operate your building. Because for the last couple of months, you've been paying for heat and hydro and water, and you haven't been doing anything, right? We haven't been operating, we've been closed. So if you're to look at those bills, that cost for those months, that's your basic building costs, right? And it's more than it should be. I can guarantee it. So it's a really great opportunity to actually pull those up at your board meetings, at your ward meetings, and just go, what did we spend, not on staffing and stuff, but just on the building for those months. That's your dead flat overhead. So how can we minimize that? And luckily it wasn't in the dead of winter, when we had like higher heating bills as well. So taking that as a baseline, how can we reduce that 10%, 20%, 30%? Well, we need to understand what we're working with. How old are your furnaces or your boilers, right? Are they older than you? Are they, relatively, how do we, in each congregation, you judge time by certain people's activities, right? Remember when Bob was in charge of the furnaces, Bob took care of the furnaces. So that was, 1994. But we need to really think about that. So when we look at boilers, when we look at furnaces, they're really mid-efficiency, older ones, and then high efficiency are the newer ones. And you can go from less than 80% efficient to like 96, 98% efficient, going from a mid-efficiency to a high efficiency. And when you look at your gas bill, you can actually just say 80% of that turned into heat and 20% of that went up the chimney as lost energy. And it's a little more nuanced than that, but it's close enough for horseshoes. And so by understanding and looking at that 20%, what is that dollar figure? You're like, holy moly, that's a lot of money, right? So we need to understand how efficient our furnace or boiler is by having it inspected by a professional and telling us, how efficient is it? What's its operating efficiency? Some of the newer ones are easier. They'll put a computer printout. Some of the older ones, not so much, but they'll know. And then what's your life expectancy on that furnace or boiler, right? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? And at your efficiency, you can start looking at payback costs and then making the call to decide when to pull the trigger and stop burning dead dinosaurs, right? and maybe upgrade to a more high efficiency one, or switching out to maybe heat pumps, electrically based heat pumps that that we can stop burning fossil fuels, right, to provide heat and cool at the same time. So we also need to maintain them. So I want you to think about your furnaces and boilers, even in your own home, as big flamey things, fire burning monsters underneath all your beautiful stuff. And that's really how you should treat those kind of appliances. So they should be inspected yearly for safety, but also for efficiency. Now, they're really a more high efficient heating and cooling appliance is awesome, but if you are more efficiently heating outside, that's still not great, okay? Because we're still bleeding dollars through the envelope, the shell of the building. And so we need to think about minimizing those costs by plugging those holes, right? Because if you're operating at 80% efficiency and you're bleeding 20% of your heat outside, we're dropping more and more and more, right? So your better bang for your dollar is actually to make your building envelope, the shell, airtight, okay? And that's because of that hot air escaping. So you have some of the tallest buildings in your neighborhood, right? Our large worship space, our congregational spaces, our big, vast, magnificent pieces of architecture. And hot air rises. We all understand that. And so for those who have been around a really long time or understand some of the different worship styles, the traditional Wesleyan worship style was down low, the congregational style, where the minister was down low and everyone was up, sort of in a bowl. And I think that's a really great way to worship in cold climates, because hot air rises. And so the minister will keep everybody warm. I'm kidding, of course. I have many friends, including Michelle here. So I'm just poking at ministers. But so hot air rises. And so what happens is we have all your heat actually up at the top of your large, expansive space. And then we do something ridiculous, is we put a giant chimney on the front of many of these buildings, whether it be a steeple, a spire, a rotunda, all the different architectures, all the different faith communities have sort of large skyward pointing features. And that hot air is actually sucked up quite a lot. How much? In the dead of winter in Ontario, you could be looking at, in your own home through your attic hatch. So I want you to just, let's make this human scale. So in your attic hatch, in your house, in the month of January, the amount of air that leaves is measured in cubic meters of air per hour. So a cubic meter of air per hour is meters of air is being lost. That's a lot of heat. That's in a home that may have 1 or 2 stories and a basement. Now you amplify that to a faith community building, heights of 30, 40 feet, plus a steeple, you could be looking at cubic meters of air per minute leaving your building. And for every cubic meter of air that leaves, there's a cubic meter of air that comes in. And in wintertime, it's cold and it's most likely dirty because it's down around the basement level. So you're bringing in really cold, really dry air and really dirty air into your space. And that's not good, right? So now we're actually we're bleeding tremendous amounts of dollars. So your attic hatch, your door to the belfry, your door to the spire, is a tremendous heat loss. And so making it, insulating it, really important, but more importantly, air sealing it will save you tremendous amounts of money. Now, many of our buildings, especially the century-old ones, were had natural ventilation baked into the architecture, right? It was before energy. And so for those, I'm just taking a scan here. If you can put what faith community you're with in the chats, I believe I have mostly Christian-based ones here. But if not, please let me know so that I can appropriately discuss. In churches, you would have rosettes, these metal circles in the ceiling architecturally, and they were actually vents. And in the spring, you would go up and open the vents, and in the fall, you would close the vents, and they just work like this. And you would open the windows along the pews. The windows are at low, and the design was to bring in that air across the congregation and actually raise it up. And you would actually amplify, use this stack effect, chimney effect, to actually keep the congregation cool, which works really well, you know, for the classic 4-hour sermons, so that people wouldn't pass out from the heat. Unfortunately, many of these ventilators, and there's different styles, are still in our buildings, and they're actually not airtight. And I've been in a few congregational spaces where I've seen 6 or 8 or 10-foot diameter circles, ventilator grills in the ceiling, rosettes, that are actually insulated and air sealed with a piece of carpet, if that. And this is huge heat loss, huge energy costs. And it's just a matter of thinking about that, thinking about those air leakage points, okay? So really important that we consider how the air leaves our buildings, because they're typically, oftentimes, but not always, depending on where we are regionally across the country, thermally massive buildings, right? Made out of stones and blocks and bricks and rocks. Versus our homes, which are made out of sticks and light frame construction. So thermally massive versus thermally insulative. So they perform differently. But air sealing saves you tremendous amounts of money. So we have a resource. I'm just going to drop it in right now. We have a resource. Realize I'm not typing to everybody here. So here's a resource. On this link you'll get is our DIY walkthrough energy audit guidebook. So this is a really great book. It came from Manitoba Hydro, and they were very gracious in giving us the document and allowing us to share it and brand it. And we had an amazing minister, Reverend Christine Boyle out of Vancouver, did amazing graphics works on this. And it's a really great document. It explains what the issues are within your community, your congregational space, and why there are issues and where the opportunities lie. And it's written for humans. It's not written for nerds. So what I really like about this document is sitting around the board table, you know, someone on your building team's like, we need to think about this. And the rest of the team may not know that much about this thing. Why should we think about that? Well, here's some really great information. And so it's an equalizer as far as understanding and knowledge. So I really like it. The back quarter of it actually has walkthrough sheets, worksheets that you can do. So your team can actually put together an action plan over, you know, a couple after service and you know, on Saturdays, and just kind of check away at the sheets and work away at them and think about your energy in a different way. Now this focuses very specifically on energy, but I think it's a really great document. I really like it. So that's free. So please click on that. Please download it. Please share it. Please, you know, social media, tweet about it, whatever you do. I don't do that, but it's a really great document. When we think about next steps, we also offer a green audit, as I mentioned, and that looks at the energy, the air quality, the food, the water, the waste, the maintenance, the marketing, the landscape, the heritage, bums in seat, rental agreements, whatever we can make more sustainable, right? I hate the word sustainable, by the way, I really do. Um, and a great example, William McDonough and Michael Brano wrote Cradle to Cradle, a great book, talked about sustainability in the language and saying, you know, would you ever at a party in front of your significant other call your relationship sustainable? Probably not, because you probably get smacked. I want to see thriving. Really, that's what I strive for when I work with faith communities. So the idea of this green audit is just to look at every aspect of your operations and how we can improve it. And it's a ton of fun, half a day, 3/4 a day, depending on square footage. And you're looking at, you know, a follow-up report that's like somewhere between 30 and 40 pages, outlines the issues and the recommendations. And it's one tool, right? It's not the only tool, but it is a service we offer. And due to COVID and our national reach, we also now have a virtual version of that where you would be at your space and I would be in my space, and we would do something like Zoom and you would actually show me your space. And I could be able to offer suggestions and opportunities. And that's a significantly cheaper option. And congregations seem to see the value in that, certainly under this stressful time of COVID. A green audit, you're looking at a ballpark under $2,000. So it's a function of square footage. So great question. Thanks, Jane. And yeah, it's less than $2,000. Travel does play a role, depending on where we are, of course. And that's why for some, if there's a capacity, you know, and we've done, you know, like a whole bunch in Winnipeg, BC, East Coast, depending on where you are, it can, we want to try to get enough capacity to justify pulling that trigger for you. And if it doesn't make sense, then we look at the virtual one to deliver a similar approach. But always start with a free one. I am English, Irish, French, and Scotch, so I have the cheap covered. Energy audits are great things. So depending on your region, you may also have energy audits available to you through nonprofit organizations or your energy providers. They focus strictly on energy. They'll break it down into more details than we might, but and you know, more details into paybacks, and they can be really valuable for sure. The point is with all of this is we need a plan, right? Each and every one of you is a volunteer oftentimes, and volunteers, our congregations are based on it and built on them, but not everyone has the skills and tools that I have, you know, or others have. And we do our best, we muddle through. You know, your own house actually doesn't come with a manual, right? Your toaster comes with a more complicated manual than your house, let alone an entire congregational space where you're trying to make budgetary decisions on something you're not really familiar with. It's really difficult. And I understand that challenge with faith communities. And so trying to find free tools and always starting with the simple stuff is really important just to help educate you. And with this time of reopening or potential reopening, these are really hard decisions. You know, how does a virus transfer? How do we worship differently? You know, a lot of communities have gone online. And interestingly, some numbers that I've heard is actually worship is actually up. More people are attending Zoom worships than would regularly have bums in seats because it's more accessible. They can watch it in their jammies or whatever the case may be. I think we may still have those kind of worship, but we need to gather. These spaces were built for gathering. We feel this need to gather stronger when we're forced to isolate. To some unfortunate circumstances where people are pushing it too quickly, but we need to gather, we need to share, and that's what these spaces were built for. And I really see the opportunity, as much as you want to get back in your congregational space and keep working and keep worshiping, pardon me, nonprofits, social enterprises, arts groups, culture groups, they want to do the same. and they need a space to do that in. And I see a huge opportunity for your spaces to be used multi-purpose. So whether it's your office spaces for meetings, whether it's your gymnasium, whether it's your basement hall, your kitchens to start social enterprise food, cooking classes, whatever the case may be. I really truly feel when I look at the built environment in a very broad way that I really see there's going to be a real huge interest in uptick once all this ends, and it will finally settle down at some point, that people want to worship more, that people want to gather more, that people want to share their culture and their knowledge and their wisdom more. And I really, really feel that faith communities have a great community opportunity. We were built on communities. We were built as a way for the community to come together and gather. And, there was a time where, the sports all happened out of the church basement. The arts all happened out of the women's hall. All of these happened. We were the community hubs. And we've lost that, and the social service net, and we've lost that over 100 years, architecturally and socially. And our buildings are still built on those processes. And I see the opportunities. So I'm really hopeful. I feel really strongly that our buildings can be used more regularly, more commonly. I think it can also be a potential moneymaker. And I know I just said making money in a faith community and bottoms clench, but we need to think about it. And so full circle, how much does it cost you to operate your building? Per square foot now. So now I'm going to put you on the spot. What's it cost per square foot to operate your building? That's a really tough question. You don't know offhand. If you do, nerd, awesome, we're best friends. But what you really need to think about is how much it was one of the lead partners, our colleague Kendra Fry, put together how nonprofits, arts and cultures groups use faith communities. And they actually rely heavily on them in many jurisdictions, urban and rural, really important. In the rural communities. We did some surveys in my area. I'm in the Peterborough area, Ontario. And yeah, really, really important that they couldn't thrive without the lower rates, not market value rates oftentimes. But that said, you still need to rent at a rate that you're making at least breaking even. We have two types of rentals within faith communities. We have for profit and we have for mission. Right? And awesome. We need both of those. But should your mission rental be below your operational cost level? It's a conversation to have, right? Are you losing money renting to certain organizations? So you need to think about that. And you can't have that question without knowing the numbers. And so that's why those numbers, like I mentioned, the last couple of months, really useful data. So just find out what it cost you to operate March and April and May, just with everything closed. So keeping that in mind, then we can think about operational costs, then we can think about rentals, then we can think about how to empower the greater community to want to be in our space. And what sets you apart from the Kinsman Hall down the street? Right? If someone's looking at renting a space, whether once, a couple times, once a month, once a week, every day, what separates your space from, community space? Your faith, your values. How do you express your values beyond your worship time? How do you express them in your building? Do we look at environmental stewardship? Do we look at social justice? A huge issue right now. And how do we make it accessible on all aspects, on all levels, not just physical accessibility? And so thinking about your values as we go to rent space is really, really critical when we look at reopening, because I want you to thrive, right? And so I want you to find those other organizations and those networks and invite them into your space, right? Okay. Green certifications. So we also have some certifications, and that can be a really great branding tool. To express those values. So we have a process of green, light green, medium green, deep green certifications. And these are sort of self-delivered. They're on our website. Michelle, I don't have that link up. If you could put that link up, if it's on there, I will put the link on for the green audits. Sorry, we're trying to do too many things at once here. There's a link for the green audits. Thank you, Michelle. And so this can be a really great way to just help brand and just help market what you're doing and the efforts you're trying to make, because I do want you to celebrate this. And this is a really hard thing to do within many faith communities, because most of the 8 same volunteers who do all the work, I know it's how it works, but I need you to sort of come in and be willing to celebrate your actions. And it's really hard. We're not really used to tooting our own horns, but it's really important that we do that so that others can see and understand that they can worship in the same way as you are. Because they may be like, wow, I didn't know, people are doing that in the congregation. That's really cool. That resonates with me. I want to be part of it. And others, community members, may come into your building going, wow, I didn't know you guys had all this green team going on. It's really cool. I'm interested. I want to learn more. Okay. And I want to rent your space because that resonates with our group. Okay. So, yeah, those are kind of really important details when we think about the building as a whole, right? I am the building nerd. I'm much better with buildings than people, but we really need to think about the building as an asset. And for those on the boards and the wardens, oftentimes it's super exhausting that we feel that it's not an asset, but it is. And time again, we've seen that value. So trying to save the money, trying to save energy, trying to minimize your air leakage, really, really important. Thinking about thermostats, where's your thermostat even located? I'll give you an example. If it's in your sanctuary, it's probably under the balcony, which means the temperature's wrong, right? Because the balcony only has 10 feet of height. And so the hot air, the temperature under the balcony is actually warmer than it is out in the main space. And so putting your thermostat just in the right spot will actually make a huge difference in thermal comfort. I think that's part of the reason a lot of people sit in the back, is just to stay warm. But it's really common to see something like that. And we don't really put the puzzle pieces together until we step back and see the whole picture. So other really low-hanging fruit, changing your lights to LEDs, that should be just a slam dunk for those in Ontario. I know there's a few here in Ontario. You can access some money right now from the provincial government through your electrical provider for LED lights. It is available in some of the other provinces. We're all still waiting for the federal government to come down with some money whenever they release the budget. We have no idea. There was supposed to be energy efficiency money before. All this happened in the budget. There's talk about green justice and green renewal and green revival economy. Michelle's been, involved in that. That we look at a just and right environmental recovery plan. I'm hopeful. Keep your mind, listen to the federal government. There should be bag loads of money, hopefully, to do energy efficiency upgrades. But the low-hanging fruit, lights, motion sensors, timers. How many of you walk around and have to turn off the lights at the end of every event, right? It's the task that the last 6 always do. Motion sensors and timers. Put the motion sensors on in the bathroom, in the hallways, stairwells can be really great. Switching your exit lights to LEDs and the new green ones. Save really, the payback's like 3 months to get a 40 watt down to a 4 watt LED. Incredible savings. payback's really quick. Your fridges and freezers, if you're rocking a green avocado fridge in the basement, it is killing you from electricity perspective. So you've got to switch that out. You've got to change it to something new. Every 5 years, the energy consumption is halved on a fridge or a freezer. And so Harvest Gold avocado green in the basement, it's absolutely astronomical, the amount of electricity it consumes. And I've seen it. I did one congregation, a Green Audit, where they were making, their fundraiser was turkey pot pies. That's what they did. And they had 4 freezers, you know, shells and turkey and veg and finished, and they just, you know, kept rotating around. And the one had chrome wings on it, like a 58 Buick. It was magnificent. But I did some rough calculations, and the fundraiser was paying for the electricity of the freezers. That was it. They weren't actually making any money. And you know, these freezers were donated with love and affection, and because, you know, someone upgraded and bought a newer energy efficient one for home. So don't let people bring junk into the community space, for sure. We just want to think about that. Okay. Closing in, we're going to do some questions here.
Yeah, so you can either put your questions into the chat box, or unmute yourself, raise your hand, whatever works for you. If you have specific questions about your faith-based location, or if you have general questions about anything that Stephen said.
Thanks, Michelle. And for those who are in United Churches, there is funds for the United Churches through the Faithful Footprints grant program, and I happen to be the manager of that program through Faith in the Common Good. So if you're at a United Church, you can access up to $30,000 in energy efficiency money. If you are not in a United Church, especially if you may be Anglican, you need to shake the bushes, because we have been in conversations with the Anglican Church of Canada, and they're hesitating. So we need to know, they need to know that there's a need and a want to do something like this, whether it be at the presbytery level, diocesan level, or at the national level. Yeah, so open to questions. There's only a few of us online here. If you want to unmute, you can totally do that. Retrofit, other provincial retrofit subsidies across Canada. Sure, Agnes. Yes and no. We can't keep track of them because they vary. Because some jurisdictions, energy's provincial delivered. Other places like Ontario, it's not. So we always just recommend that you contact your gas and electrical provider, all faith communities, and ask about rebates. You should then check your provincial jurisdiction to see if there are rebates. And you should also check your municipal community, because as a community, as a public space, there may be money available to you for upgrades. In some places, it's not super common, but I have seen it happen. So that database changes day by day, and with COVID, like, a lot of things disappeared. So we can't keep up with them. So yeah, reach out to your energy providers, municipality, province, and yeah, keep your ears out for the feds. Great question, for sure. Yeah, any other questions out there? Don't be shy. You know, if you have a specific question to your specific building, this is a great time to ask, and it's totally okay. So otherwise, I'll just keep blathering on. What I want you to just really think about as we start with, and I'll post a link to it here, efficiency pyramid. So I want you to understand that what we want to do is do the simple things first, and then the hard things later, okay? So Excellent. See, Norman's had an energy audit done, and they're using that as a blueprint to help determine next projects, and that's great, right? I want you to think about setting a plan, whether it's through us or through others. We don't care. We just want you to do good work. The link I just put up here is a pyramid of energy conservation, and what it looks at is that's not quite the one I wanted. Sorry, I'll put another one up. It's good enough. What I really like about this is start with the simple stuff, the understanding, create a plan, change some light bulbs, some switches, motion sensors, then think about, maybe some fixtures and maybe some appliances and insulation and mechanicals, and at the very tippy top, solar panels, right? From an energy efficiency perspective, solar panels is not your first line of attack. It's actually your last. And that's because a green avocado fridge is going to take 2 extra solar panels just to power that beast. So you're better off, it's way more economical to change it out, the fridge first. It's not sexy, it's not fun, it's not fancy bling on the roof to draw attention to you. But from an energy efficiency perspective, it's actually the last thing. From a social justice, from an environmental stewardship, and if there's grants and rebates available to you, it could be a great financial reason to put solar panels on first. But from an energy efficiency perspective, it's actually the last. So, yeah. Anyone solar programs that are allowed to battery power? Good question, Agnes. Not to my knowledge, everyone's grid tied. Because that's where the rebates come, as you're actually feeding into the system. When the grid is down, typically, and there is various technologies, so I can't comment blanketly, but typically it's called an anti-island device. And so when the grid goes down, you no longer provide to the grid. It actually locks you out. And the reason is so you don't electrocute hydro lines people, because they get grumpy about that. They're union, right? So they don't. So there's an anti-islanding, so to prevent you from putting power on when they believe the grid is down. That may change jurisdiction by jurisdiction. There are some tools that and equipment that can redirect that power internally. That sort of switching mechanism typically isn't covered by the grant programs, but you could potentially feed it back into your own building. Again, it depends their setup. There's a couple different ways. You can have 1 meter that spins forwards or backwards, depending on which way it's going, the electrons, or you can have 2 meters, one that's coming in and one that's going out. And so there's a bunch of varieties for that. It's a great question, though. Yeah.
I'm just going to
Yeah, sure. That's perfect.
This came up in Hamilton with a church that does have a large solar array, and I know that the technologies really aren't there yet for them, but it came up in a resilience hub type question.
Yeah.
Especially there's other buildings with geothermal, and there's other that makes these buildings really attractive to become a hub in a broader emergency situation. But it's unfortunate if they have that whole array of solar panels that then now is dead because the power grid is out.
Great point. And these resilience hubs, and Faith in the Common Good has worked on those as well. And the idea that these emergency disasters, that we need these hubs, that who's going to provide, coffee or a bed or a place to charge your phone or a place to, food. I would say that there is technology to turn to power the building itself with that solar array. You need to talk to a highly competent electrician. You would need to involve the Electrical Safety Authority, and you would also need to bring in the municipality to help pay for it. Because if you can say we can provide power during an outage to do A, B, and C, you become an emergency shelter, and there's funding for that. So yeah, great question.
Okay.
Norman, great question about stained glass, a classic one I didn't touch on. Stained glass windows. From an energy efficiency perspective, the best thing to do with stained glass is to smash them all out and fill in the wall. Um, Obviously, that's not going to happen by any stretch. Now, with most buildings, including Norman's, I've had a look at it and I know the building. It's a thermally massive building. And so we feel that we're losing a tremendous amount of energy through the window glazing itself. It's not as true as we think within faith community buildings, with the thermally massive ones. With those that are stick frame, different conversation. But the thermal mass actually holds energy. And so, oh, there's a great big heron that just flew over my window, sorry. So these thermally massive buildings actually hold the energy and then release it. And so there's actually more energy leaking around the window, around the frame, around the operable part of the window, than actually through the window proper. And so caulking the window frame, to the wall is actually really important, and better value. And doing that on the outside is even more important because now we're also keeping water out, especially if it's a wood frame stained glass, at least on the outside, the mullions and whatnot. So caulking the outside, high performance, caulking the inside, easier to do typically, because you can do it with a ladder or a piece of scaffold. Outside always takes way more effort, cherry pickers and whatnot. Double glazed units, if you're going to go like actually insulate the stained glass, you want to put the window on the outside. And there are a few companies that do that. To be super clear, we don't get kickbacks or paybacks or anything, but I do know Rainbow Makers out of Barrie has done a lot of congregations I've worked with. And what the value is of these systems, and there are others, of course, but the value of these systems is not anyone can put double glazed units on the outside, but the real detail is getting the curves and then putting the mullions and the details, the architraves, all the architectural details on the outside. So it's actually hard to tell that you've got double glazed units on the outside. That's best practice, putting it on the outside that keeps the inside warm. Super best practice is putting the stained glass between two other pieces of glass, which is redonkulously expensive. And if you have that kind of money, please give us a call. We're a nonprofit. Yeah, that's, but caulking, air sealing around stained glass windows is far more important. Don't ever caulk the stained glass in the metal things. Don't ever do that. But between the window and the wall. Yeah. Michelle, you put Rainbow Makers. Oh yeah. Cool.
Sure. I thought I would add a link to make it easy for anyone who is interested in connecting with them.
Yeah. And we don't have any association.
No, we don't have any association with them. So we have time for perhaps one last question, and then any closing remarks that Stephen has. I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. I appreciate Stephen's style of sharing all of these diverse opportunities and talking about the issues in a way that a lay person can really understand them. So I think he's given you a lot to think about today. Feel free to explore our website to see some of the other programs that we have that you might be interested in. You can always contact Stephen or myself if you have any follow-up questions. We will be sending a follow-up email with a link to the recording that you can share with anyone you like in your community. So are there any final questions before Stephen just wraps it up for us today?
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. And if something does come to you after this, oh, I should have asked, or someone pokes you that you were on and ask, you got a question, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer the questions. I do love what I do. I'm grateful to do it. I'm passionate about buildings. And even if Faith in the Common Good has some amazing resources on our website, not just related to buildings, but gardens and food and social justice. Please crawl through the website if you haven't been. If you want some more resources, feel free to reach out to Michelle or myself. And we're happy to have conversations with you. And we've got Katrin on the call here as well, who's also part of our team. So thanks for taking the time. Thanks for your volunteer time to be here. I do hope it was worth your while, and I'm grateful. Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Steve and Michelle.
All right. Take care.